In the final days of the 41st millennium, the largest tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan ever recorded descended upon Baal, homeworld of the Blood Angels Space Marines, and its twin moons of Baal Prime and Baal Secundus. The battle which followed would be the bloodiest and most costly in the noble history of the Sons of Sanguinius, in what would be later known as the Devastation of Baal, or the Battle of Baal. News reached Baal 998 M41 that the defenses of the Cryptus Shield, the fortified worlds of the Cryptus system long intended to hold back the might of Hive Fleet Leviathan and shield the Blood Angels' home system, had collapsed. Commander Dante had already put plans in motion to defend the Blood Angels' homeworld, with detached strike forces fighting hit and run battles with the Leviathan's smaller splinter fleets throughout the Red Scar. Meanwhile, the defenses of Baal and her moons were bolstered like never before. Indomitable fortresses rose above the sweltering sands, and the might of the Blood Angel successor chapters, the Sanguinary Brotherhood, gathered from across the galaxy. Yet still it did not seem to be enough, for the Tyranids were seemingly without number, and Hive Fleet Leviathan was learning the weaknesses of its prey at an exponential rate. Knowing that the consumption of the Cryptus system would open the floodgates for the unstoppable Tyranid invasion of Baal, Commander Dante took action. At the head of a mighty strike force later known as the Cryptus Campaign that comprised the 1st and 2nd companies of the Blood Angels, Brother Corbulo, Captain Carlion, Chief Librarian Mephiston, and the bulk of Gabriel's Seth Flesh Terrors, Dante headed out for the Cryptus system. This mighty force reached the Cryptus system in time to aid the last hard-pressed Imperial defenders and avert complete catastrophe. Yet the war that followed was unremittingly savage, with both the Imperial and Tyranid forces suffering rapidly escalating casualties. The Blood Angels were eventually forced to unleash an ancient weapon of Necrontyr provenance called the Magnavitrium, to annihilate an entire world of the Cryptus system and use its debris to gut the onrushing splinter fleet. Showing his wisdom, Dante accepted that the Tyranids had been slowed but not stopped. The Blood Angels commander ordered his forces to return to Baal. His chapter intended to fight for its survival upon the worlds of its birth. By the opening days of 999 M41, the Baal system had been reinforced like never before. Answering Commander Dante's call, one Blood Angel successor chapter after another arrived to offer all of their strength. Fleets of cruisers and battle barges gathered in the void around Baal and its moons, their combined might enough to crush star systems and end worlds. Still, as deep void aspect screens turned blood red with contact runes, and a 10,000-kilometer wide tidal wave of chitin and flesh surged into the Baal system, it seemed unlikely that it would prove enough. With the Tyranids closing in, Commander Dante and his closest lieutenants authorized deeds that would have been unthinkable in brighter days. The Blood Angels' precious gene seed reserves were removed from their storage crypts, packed carefully for transit under the watchful eyes of sanguinary priests, and then sent away on a swift starship with a hand-picked complement of guards. At the same time, millennia of tradition was cast aside as Blood Angels' gunships gathered every viable aspirant they could from the nomadic tribes of Baal Prime and Baal Secundus. These youths were armed and then ferried to the Arx Angelicum. There they formed defense garrisons whose strength was intended to augment that of Sanguinius's sons. At least 40,000 wide-eyed youths are gathered in this way, and told that any who survived the coming battle would surely prove their worthiness to join the chapter's ranks. All the Sanguinary Brotherhood headed Dante's call and came to the Blood Angels' aid, from the ferocious flesh terrors to the noble blood drinkers, and even the savage warriors of the Carmine Blades. Every single battle brother would be vital in the upcoming war, for the Tyranid fleet was enormous, by far the largest Tyranid host ever recorded by the Imperium. Commander Dante ordered his naval vessels to strike at the enemy. Hundreds of thousands of bioships, in clusters so thick that the invasion fleet seemed to be one vast many-limbed organism, surged towards Baal. The Blood Angels' own fleet met them head-on, its numbers bolstered by the presence of several spaceborne successor chapters. Across 100 fronts, the red-armored voidcraft of the Blood Angels and their successors struck at the fleshy Tyranid Hive ships. Lances and gun decks split the darkness with their fury, Ruptured bioships tumbled away, slicks of ichor spilling from their sundered innards to freeze in the merciless void. The sky above Baal erupted in a violent firestorm as the rugged vessels of the Space Marines slammed their way into the midst of the approaching Tyranids, launching devastating broadsides and storms of nuclear-tipped warheads. Valorous as this naval action was, it was also hopeless, one by one. Space Marine battle barges and cruisers were isolated and overwhelmed, battered by organic missiles and enveloped by swarms of smaller bioships. Entering low orbit over Baal and its moons, the Leviathan's vessels began to disgorge clouds of spores and organic transports into the atmosphere. As the void battle raged overhead, the defenders of Baal awaited the first waves of Tyranids, taking up positions amidst Horus Heresy-era fortifications that had been unearthed and rebuilt by Chapter serfs and servitors. Baal and its twin moons had been transformed into killing fields, dotted with artillery redoubts, mine-laced choke points, and crisscrossing fire zones. Dozens of Tyranid bioships were butchered, hundreds of thousands of warrior organisms slain before they ever saw the irradiated sands of Baal. Still, the Blood Angels were driven back, every victory carrying its own butcher's bill and flaming hulks and dead battle brothers. Soon enough, the Void War became unsustainable as more and more Tyranids emerged from the darkness in squamous waves, with their surviving Voidcraft forced to fall back and harass the Hive Fleet's flanks. The Blood Angels now faced the full fury of the Tyranid invasion. On Baal, Baal Prime, and Baal Secundus, aircraft-sized mycetic spores darkened the skies in their millions. The shadow and the warp settled like a shroud around the Baal system, choking off any further hope of reinforcement. The sons of Sanguinius stood alone in the face of the hurricane of death to come. The first few Tyranid swarms to make planetfall were obliterated by pre-ranged artillery bombardments and bolter rounds long before they reached the defensive lines. Yet with each passing moment, more spores rained down from low orbit, their bulging flesh sacs bursting open to disgorge warrior organisms into the fray. By the 10th wave, the ground was barely visible beneath a stampede of Chitine armored bodies. Amidst this carpet of living flesh loomed colossal synapse creatures, hive tyrants and giant tervigons which spewed out gaunts by the score. These monsters directed the swarms around them, even as they unleashed salvos of burning bioplasma, or tore great rents in the fortifications with massive weapon limbs. At the rear of the Tyranid swarms, a hulking creature surveyed the carnage, observing the Blood Angels' strategies, directing its lesser kin to counter their every move with a cunning born of eons-long warfare. The Swarm Lord, herald of the hive mind, had been spawned anew to ensure the Blood Angels' demise. On Baal and its moon of Baal Secundus, rippling tides of warrior organisms surged onto the defenders' guns and were shredded amidst storms of fire, their corpses piled up in hideous drifts. Yet still they pressed forwards. The settlement of Angels' Fall, where the Blood Angels gathered all aspirants for the trials to become new initiates of the chapter, became a blood-drenched altar to the gods of battle, its defenders massacred by an avalanche of bodies and razored talons. Gabriel Seth and his berserk flesh terrors led the counterattack, tearing the heart from one Tyranid swarm after another, but their victories did not come without cost. At the same time, elsewhere on Baal Secundus, the Carmine blades held firm in the face of each Tyranid attack. Feet planted, bolters roaring, they defend Baal's astropathic relay against impossible odds, bringing honor to their names with each bloody day that dawns in the hope that anyone, will hear the astro-telepathic call for help of the scions of Sanguinius. On the moon of Baal Prime, the situation was worse still, as the Tyranids hurled overwhelming forces into battle. Over the course of weeks, the scions of Sanguinius hurled back 19 waves of Tyranid assaults, fighting with a valor and skill that honored the memory of their fallen Primarch. Blood Drinkers fought back-to-back with Angels and Carmine, forming a circle of blades and bolters against phalanxes of advancing Tyranid warriors. Blood Angels' assault marines leapt into the heart of the enemy swarm, hunting the largest and most ferocious monsters. Amidst rad, scorched desert valleys, massed formations of Adeptus Astartes tanks and artillery clashed with stampedes of charging carnifexes in a grinding, churning maelstrom of metal and flesh. For solar weeks the fighting raged on, The Tyranid body count spiraled upwards with breathtaking speed. Dante's warriors felling hundreds of Tyranids for every one of their own that fell. With every Tyranid attack, more battle brothers were slain. 5 chapter masters amongst the Blood Angels' sanguinary brotherhood gave their lives to hold back the surging tide, but as the bodies piled higher, it seemed such selfless sacrifice would be for naught. Baal was ready to fall. It was at this dark hour that a fresh calamity was unleashed upon the Baal system. In a cataclysmic eruption of empiric energy, the galaxy-spanning warp storm known as the Great Rift tore open. The skies above Baal burned with etheric fire, and within the roiling depths of the immaterium, ancient, malevolent beings turned their dread gaze upon the material realm. Upon Baal Prime, the chapters of the Sanguinary Brotherhood unleashed the full measure of their hatred against the Tyranid swarms. It was as the fighting upon the moon was at its most ferocious that reality tore open, and the scent of brimstone and burning blood filled the air. With a bellowed chorus of praises to the blood god Khorne, demonic legions boiled from the widening rift. At their head came a creature drawn from the blackest of nightmares, a bat-winged monstrosity wielding a rune-marked axe in one clawed fist and a barbed whip in the other. This was Ka'Bandha, bloodthirster of Khorne. No foe was more hated by the sons of Sanguinius. For thousands of years before, during the Cygnus campaign, Ka'Bandha had stoked in them the red thirst, the genetic curse which had so ravaged the chapter in the millennia afterwards. Ka'Bandha sought the sole honor of slaughtering the Blood Angels, and had no intention of allowing the Tyranids to interfere before the time of his triumph was at hand. The Bloodthirster's demon legions fell upon both Tyranids and the Astartes defenders of Baal, and Xenos and transhuman blood was spilled in torrents. Tyranid warriors hacked and tore at leering bloodletters, while stampedes of bloodcrushers swept across the gore-splattered earth, smashing termagants beneath their brazen hooves. Ka'Bandha stalked through the madness of battle, reaping a devastating toll upon all in his path with great swipes of his dread weapons. The Space Marine Defenders, led by Chapter Master Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Tearers, fell back, harried on all sides. Only the sacrifice of the Knights of Blood, an excommunicated successor chapter who had nonetheless been accepted as allies by Commander Dante, allowed the survivors to board their vessels and escape, as Baal Prime was overwhelmed by warp-spawn monstrosities. As Seth's forces retreated, they caught one last glimpse of the Knights of Blood, hurling themselves into the thick of close combat with mindless ferocity, fully enveloped by the madness of the Black Rage. Commander Dante led his few remaining warriors in a fighting retreat to the walls of the Blood Angels' fortress monastery, the Arx Angelicum. Time itself was a victim of the surging empiric insanity. It seemed as if the carnage stretched on for Terran years, as Xenos and Space Marine fought and slew, racing towards a mutual annihilation. The greatest Tyranid wave yet then slammed into the defenses of the Arx Angelicum and finally breached them. 3 successor chapter masters fell in the Battle of the Dome of Angels alone. Bodies pile high amidst the sundered defenses. Still the defenders fight on, even throwing open the gates of the Tower of Amerio and letting the captive members of the Death Company loose. If the Blood Angels were to die, they intended to do so in battle and on their own terms. Forward strode the Swarmlord, entering the fray at this vital juncture, carving Space Marines apart with every slice of its jagged bone swords. Exhausted and filled with sorrow, yet defiant as ever, Dante hacked his way through the press of Xenos flesh with the Axe Mortalis, seeking the Swarmlord's head. Under the burning sky, the two dueled until Dante, bleeding from a dozen mortal wounds, cut the creature down. As Dante collapsed, his anguished warriors straining to reach his prone body, the tortured skies finally cleared. The storm had passed, and where before the Tyranid armada had blotted the sky, not a single Xenos vessel remained. In their place were majestic Imperial ships. The Primarch Roboute Guilliman, the resurrected Avenging Sun, had arrived at the head of the Great Crusade. Now it was drop pods and Stormraven gunships which dotted the skies above Baal, as Guilliman and his warriors crashed down into the midst of the Tyranid swarm. Hive Fleet Leviathan's remaining ground forces still outnumbered the Space Marines, But the death of the Swarm Lord and the destruction of the Tyranid fleet left it reeling, with the Primaris Space Marines fighting at Guilliman's side, unleashing devastatingly accurate salvos from their Mark II cool pattern bolt rifles. The mighty host of the Leviathan was cut to pieces. The salvation of Baal did not come quickly or without cost. Even as Guilliman's forces rained down to relieve the siege of the Arx Angelicum, even as they joined forces with the surviving sons of Sanguinius and fought to purge Baal and its moons of Xenos, still more Imperial lives were lost. Yet hopeless defeat has become a glorious victory against the odds. Meanwhile, if certain grim secrets of the Blood Angel's gene line were finally laid bare to the eyes of the Ultramarines Primarch, he chose to keep his own counsel and left such things unspoken. Baal and Baal Secundus were cleansed of Tyranids before a solar month was out. The slaughter was spearheaded by Primaris Space Marines clad in the panoply of the Blood Angels and their successors. On Baal Prime, no such martial efforts were required. The moon had been utterly scoured of life, both Imperial and Tyranid. Gravely wounded but still alive, Commander Dante bent the knee before Roboute Guilliman, now the ruling Lord Commander of the Imperium. In Dante and the surviving Blood Angels and the chapters of the Sanguinary Brotherhood, Guilliman recognized a noble spirit, a flickering flame kept alive from the Imperium's glorious past. His gift to them was mighty indeed formations of Primaris Space Marines with which to bolster their devastated ranks, derived from the bloodline and gene seed of Sanguinius. Of Hive Fleet Leviathan's hundreds of thousands of bio-ships, there was not a single sign. Upon Baal Prime, nothing remained but desolation. Though Gabriel Seth and his last surviving flesh terrors had escaped the unnatural cataclysm unleashed by the opening of the Great Rift, the demons had vanished back into the warp, leaving behind an ominous warning mountains of Tyranid skulls, piled impossibly high across most of the moon's southern hemisphere. These ziggurats formed the reviled, eight-pillared sigil of Khorne, a grim message to his eternal nemesis. In the wake of the Leviathan's defeat, the Blood Angels began to rebuild. Their gene seed stocks were recalled, taking their rightful place beneath the rising arches of the restored Arx Angelicum. The several thousand grizzled aspirants who survived the siege were all inducted into the chapter, and those that successfully endured the Astartes transformation were funneled into the outsized scout companies authorized by Commander Dante for his chapter and their successors. The great blasphemous sigil erected by Ka'Bandha from Tyranid skulls was scoured from Baal Prime on the orders of Dante by orbital strikes from the Blood Angels fleet. The ranks of the Blood Angels and their successor chapters of the Sanguinary Brotherhood were further bolstered by a huge influx of Primaris Space Marines, unfrozen from hibernation within the vaults of the Arch Mechanicus Zar Quasitor and produced upon Baal itself using the newly installed mechanisms brought by Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Coel. With Commander Dante declared regent of the entire Imperium Nihilus by Roboute Guilliman, the Blood Angels and their successors were soon ready to rejoin the war for the Emperor's realm. It is well that they were, for the fight had become more desperate than ever before.